One of the big advantages, especially for teachers and students, is that you get really good diagnostic information as a teacher or a school principal, but working with the kids, so you can identify an individual kid or a small group that needs particular support in literacy and numeracy. So it really can help you to plan future learning episodes. Basically, what occurs with any form of national or international testing is initially students aren't so familiar with it, and then the teachers and the schools get the students very familiar with it, give them practice tests and all sorts of things. So you see a fairly reasonable incline and improvement over the first 2 or 3 years, and then for the next 20 years or however it goes along, it fairly well plateaus. And the Chief Executive Officer of ACARA, the group responsible for Naplan development and so forth, mentioned that in 2015, just a few weeks ago, that there is this there's a stability in the results, is the sort of words he used, but what I prefer to call a plateau. Why is that too? One of the things is when you've got big numbers of people, not just a small group of 20 students in a class, but 1 million students plus, it's very difficult to move the whole cohort. So it sort of flattens out over time. Once they get wise to what the test looks like and how to do it well, you're going to spend lots of money getting probably a similar result. Well, I think there's some in the media that would argue no. There's some academic research articles that would also suggest that Naplan's purpose of this diagnostic thing is being compromised by also adding to it another purpose of accountability of school principals, of teachers and so on. And so that confuses the worth of it. So the reality to me is that Naplan is about to align very well with the Australian curriculum in, for example, English and mathematics for literacy and numeracy, which it hasn't done to date. 2016, next year, is the first year in which that's going to happen, which I went, hurrah, that's great. The next thing which is about to happen is it's about to go online. And online doesn't mean just replication of the existing type of test, but it indeed means that there'll be the ability to tailor the test to individuals. So if you're a high flyer in numeracy, for example, what will happen is you'll get extension questions that will encourage you to go on and evidence how good you are. And if you're not so good, perhaps me, then it'll give me things that I'm quite comfortable with and can continue on with. There are critics too also of that style of testing, because some fear that what happens, as you do in some other countries, where you go to the breaking point of students, where you get them harder and harder and harder questions till almost everybody leaves the room going, oh gee, that was terrible, that was hard. So you just got to get that fine balance, and I'm sure that ACARA will be able to do that well. So it's going to go online as of 2017, not for the whole of Australia, but for much of Australia. And by 2019, ACARA will have all students in Australia in years 3, 5, 7 and 9 sitting the test online according to their current schedule. I think we make an unsafe assumption that many students are digital natives and have access to internet and so forth. We've already looked at this for the state of Queensland, what it means for rural and remote areas in particular as an example, and it is very difficult with the bandwidth and the current limitations of technology. So as to how ACARA is actually going to effect that, that's an interesting question for them to solve, and I'm sure they're well down the track on that and there will be solutions, but I anticipate it'll be able to be done on devices, as you say, the tablets, the iPads, as well as laptops or on a screen. But what will be interesting is that students will need to be doing it at the same time. Well, there's a whole business industry that makes money associated with tests, be they state or national or international, to help students prepare and achieve better at them. And for example, the Australian Council of Education Research did a review of senior assessments in Queensland. The report came out last year. And one of the things was found was that there's a fair bit of over-preparation going on, for example, even for the Queensland Core Skills Test. And Dr. Gabrielle Matters, who authored much of that, reported that this style of gaming and issue is a problem where you've got a whole industry that's making business out of it. Even when you go to the ACARA website or the QCAA in Queensland as an example website, you'll see that there are practice resources available, fantastic things. One funny thing for you, I was on the governing authority back in the early 90s for the state of Queensland, and it was interesting because in 1991 we did a big trial around Queensland of the Queensland Core Skills Test for Year 12 for the first time. It wasn't the whole cohort, 92 was. Thankfully we did the trial before the whole of the cohort of Year 12 students were basically sitting it. And what occurred was we found, amazingly, that some students in 12 years of schooling had never seen a multiple choice item. I think that's one of the biggest issues that the media is concerned about, and parents and principals and all the rest of it, and teachers and students themselves, is the notion of a league table. Again, if I go back to my days on the governing authority when we had the overall positions for Year 12 leavers, the statewide ranking of students, we were under the current legislation at that time able to prevent the publication of league tables. And that was in 1992 when we first started off the overall position for Queensland. Come 2006, the legislation had changed such, and that was the first year where the media could actually get league tables, if you like, and produce them. Now, what they mean is something that's very debatable. And, you've really got to think, well, often it's much a reflection of the cohort of students going there rather than the quality of other things such as the education provision. And yes, there are some examples where you can say, oh yes, but my student went to this school and they did much better. And the bottom line there is that all of a sudden, probably, they changed who they were keeping company with. We know that one of the biggest variables in student achievement isn't necessarily the school, it's the capability of the student. John Hattie's research shows that over a meta-analysis of many years of work, showing that around about half of a student's achievement in anything is due to their personal capability, a third of it almost due to teaching, but who they keep company with, their peers, is a major influence. And so if you've got a new bunch of people who like to perform well, guess what happens? It's expensive. Some people have suggested the resources could be better placed to doing some professional development and learning for teachers. I'm not so sure about that. But the costs, let's just take Queensland as an example. You have a marking operation for the students that sit it in Queensland that takes approximately 18 days to complete for the Year 3579 test. There's 455 teachers in 2 shifts across those days that are marking it. But before they start marking, they have to do 2 days of training. And that's a very expensive exercise where people, for example, from Queensland have to go to Sydney to be, if you like, their professional learning and development take place so that they're going to provide quality guidance for markers. And then they come back and do 2-day training associated with the markers. And that in itself is a very expensive exercise. You go, well, yeah, it's just to mark that particular test. What's interesting though with the costs is that a lot of people find that there's significant benefits as a teacher, for example, professional learning about how to make quality judgments. All of a sudden they're seeing lots of student work in response to a particular question and getting a really good knowledge, a shared knowledge which they can then take back, not only from their own markers, but take back to the schools and influence the quality of learning and teaching at the end of the day and justifying judgments. One thing that is interesting is that at the end of every one of those 18 days is 10% of the actual scripts marked on the day are randomly sampled to check on the quality of marking and to recalibrate, if you like. So if I'm a bit of a wayward marker, they say, Ken, would you, get not taken out in the back room and told what to do, but sort of taken out in the back room and re-educated on how to do it more accurately. Not only that, they have a further 10% in which they specifically target things. So it's interesting, there's this sampling that goes on so that the community can have extraordinary confidence in the quality of marking associated with the Naplan tests. We've actually done a trial. ACARA got Queensland to lead a trial at years 11 and 12 3 or 4 years ago now, where they did some of this online marking. And what was very interesting was this, that what was judged as an A in physics in, say, Sydney or Brisbane or Townsville or Perth or whatever, physics or chemistry or one of the more advanced maths and so on, was the same around the country on a 5-point scale, which was extremely interesting. And where we've had trials, in the state of Queensland in particular, where we have had online marking, sure, there are a few issues. Some people find it very difficult as markers to read screens. Most don't. At this university, for example, we have a lot of staff, myself included, who used to mark pen and paper things and now are very comfortable at doing things online because it gives us abilities and technologies to be able to provide quality judgments and direct feedback in specific areas to the student that can help them improve future works. Now, given that Naplan's diagnostic, I'd hope to see some of that targeted, if you like, work. One of the very interesting things to me is that Queensland keeps the errors that students make. And for example, in 2015, on one of the questions on how to spell the word exactly for year 3, the word exactly, there were 16,000 students did that, and there were 11,200 wrong versions of it. It was amazing. And I asked people who are knowledgeable in the area, I said, well, why is that? This seems to be fairly straightforward, And they said, well, in actual fact, it's beyond the developmental level of the students. And so they were guessing and were guessing poorly. Look, there was a Senate inquiry into Naplan and the results of that were published early in 2014. There's been subsequent works, for example, by the Whitlam Institute at the University of Sydney in conjunction with the University of Melbourne, if I recall. And one of the things that they've highlighted in the submissions to the Senate and in the research finding from independent research, if you like, is that there are significant pressures on students. And when you read some of the Senate submissions, for example, by parents and schools, as well as some of the other research in that, where you've got the thoughts and so forth of teachers about the pressure on students and their reactions and their self-esteem, the crying, all sorts of things like that happen to a number of the students. And so you've got to say, well, really, is this taking me, if I'm the year 3 student at this point in time, and saying, Ken, you're very able in these aspects of literacy, but need further work on? I go, thank you very much. It's like seeing the medical doctor who says to you, look, to fix you up, we need to do this, intrusion, whatever it is, a bit of medication, surgery, or I want you to do more walking each week, or whatever they say. Oh, thank you very much for that. That to me is a much more helpful approach for students to see that at the end of the day, there's going to be significant benefits because their teacher has first-hand information there, really quality data, especially from next year when we align with the Australian curriculum, that they're going to be able to use to inform the future teaching episodes for Ken, who didn't do well on this bit of this aspect of literacy. Wow, what a question. A few years ago, call it 30, 40 or more years ago, parents typically had families of, let's call it 8. Today it's about 1.8. And so there's a heavy investment and they're extremely interested in their child's education. Not that they weren't before, but that they often live a lot through that. And so with parents, a number of them are very concerned that their child performs well. You go, hang on a moment, this is meant to actually be about diagnosis. It's like going for your blood tests and getting some results that say, we now need to do whatever with you, rather than we want squeaky clean blood results, and we're going to substitute somebody else's to do that. The reality is, yes, parents are concerned, but I would suggest that those fears are unwarranted in a number of cases, because if you take the attitude that this can help my child at the end of the day, because it's reporting on where the child is and the sorts of gains that they wish to make in the near future, which I think is a really significant advantage of any form of diagnostic testing, whether it's class-generated tests by the teacher, Naplan, or whatever it is. To begin with, there are national benchmarks that the students are shown to be above, and for example in Queensland over 90% of the students were above the minimum requirements for the years 3, 5, 7 and 9. Terrific. With that though, what's interesting is that the results themselves for the individual are pretty critical, because if I'm a classroom teacher, I want to know that this student or this small group of students have got something, or the whole class, and I go, well, is that about my teaching and learning experiences that I've provided, or it's something specific to the group? And often, I've got to say, as a performed professional educator, it is often something that we need to do differently with that particular student or small group of students, or even the whole class, to bring them to stuff that, for years I've done whatever it happens to be and everybody else has done it well, but I suddenly run into a cohort where this class just doesn't get it. And I have to step back as a professional and think, well, how can I help them to get it? And so it's very good, I reckon, both for the students individually, and of course for the teacher and for the parents to know what the diagnosis is and what the prognosis is. And I think that forward-looking, what are we going to do about this, is the most critical aspect. Because some schools are highly selective about who they allow to remain within their cohort. We know that some principals and teachers occasionally do say to students, you're not showing those days, are you, to keep the results up? So that's an issue in itself, and that's out there in the media well and truly. But one of the things I think with Naplan for the future is that whilst we're seeing this bit of what I call a plateau effect, I do feel that schools that have, if you like, students who are achieving on the lower end of things will probably be advantaged by it, because one of the things they're striving for, whether the teacher or the school principal or whatever, is to improve those results, and thinking through and talking amongst your colleagues about how can we do this aspect or these things in literacy or numeracy and so on better, so that our students can achieve even higher learning gains. I always say to students at the university, look, it's fairly easy to get a 5% gain on, say, a kid who's got 90 and they go to 95 on whatever it is. It's very difficult, and much more important to take a student who's got 40 and get them to 60. That's a big gain of 50% versus 5. So with that, I think the sort of gaming that goes on to, whatever Naplan has more than one purpose, and as I said, the accountability purpose is a significant issue, and to me it almost needs to be teased out. What is this truly for? Is it for diagnostic purposes as originally intended, or is it for other things such as accountability? When you confuse the two, unfortunately you do get a number of distortions. So at the end of the day, you do find that some parents are particularly interested in their students, their children achieving well. And in Brisbane, for example, there was one in the media recently where the house prices have gone up 20-30% over the last 2 or 3 years in a particular suburb, because the state school there keeps on getting very good Naplan results. Now you've got to say, do I want to spend another 100,000 or whatever the figure is on my house to achieve that, or do other things? And so yes, there are indeed some distorting effects associated with the way that Naplan can be used in some instances.